There's something fascinating about human nature. The moment something becomes uncertain, our attention often becomes stronger. When someone is always available, always responding, always showing us where we stand, we may appreciate them, but we rarely feel consumed by the question of what they are thinking. But when that same person suddenly becomes distant, stops responding, or gives us less attention than before, something changes inside us. We begin thinking about them more. We replay conversations. We analyze messages. We wonder what went wrong. And suddenly the person who was once simply part of our life becomes the center of our thoughts. Why? Because the human mind does not like unfinished stories. When you know exactly where you stand, there is very little mystery. But uncertainty creates a psychological tension. Your mind wants an answer. It wants closure. It wants to understand why someone who once showed interest is now distant. And the more you fail to get that answer, the more attention you may give to the person withholding it. This is why someone can ignore 10 people and receive almost no reaction from them. Yet the moment they ignore the one person who desperately wants their attention, that person may start chasing harder. It isn't always because the ignored person suddenly became more attractive. It is because uncertainty has entered the relationship. Think about it. If someone tells you clearly, "I don't want this relationship," you may be hurt, but eventually you can process the reality. There is an answer. But if they disappear, return, disappear again, respond warmly one day and coldly the next, your mind starts searching for meaning. What happened? Do they still care? Did I say something wrong? Are they testing me? Or should I reach out again? And this is where curiosity can slowly become obsession. You start spending emotional energy trying to solve a problem that may not even deserve your attention. The danger is that you can mistake this mental fixation for deep love. Or you tell yourself, "I can't stop thinking about this person, so they must mean something special to me." But sometimes you can't stop thinking about them because the situation has never been resolved. There's a difference between loving someone and being psychologically trapped by uncertainty. A person who understands this begins to see relationships differently. Instead of immediately reacting to someone's absence, they pause. They ask themselves, "Do I genuinely miss this person, or am I uncomfortable because I no longer have their attention?" That question can change everything, because sometimes you're not chasing the person, you're chasing the answer, you're chasing closure, you're chasing the feeling of being chosen by someone who made you feel rejected. And once you recognize that, you regain control over your own mind. You stop interpreting every unanswered message as a challenge. You stop treating someone's silence like a puzzle you must solve. You stop believing that their attention determines your value. The strongest person in the room is not always the person who gets the most attention. Sometimes it is the person who can tolerate uncertainty without abandoning their self-respect. Because when you stop needing an answer from someone else, their silence loses its power over you. And once you understand that uncertainty can pull people into chasing, you begin to notice something even deeper. Sometimes the absence of attention doesn't simply create curiosity. It creates the illusion that the person withholding that attention must be more valuable. Think about how quickly the mind can change its interpretation of someone. When a person is constantly available, you may see them as ordinary. You know they will answer, you know they are interested, you know where you stand. There is comfort in that, but comfort does not always create excitement. Then someone comes along who is difficult to reach. They don't respond immediately, or they don't constantly seek your approval. They don't explain themselves every 5 minutes. Suddenly, your mind begins assigning greater importance to them. You start thinking, "Why aren't they trying to impress me?" And that question can become strangely attractive. You may begin imagining that they possess confidence, status, mystery, or some rare quality that everyone else lacks. But here is where you have to be careful. Difficulty of access is not proof of value. Something can be difficult to obtain and still be completely wrong for you. Yet human beings often confuse scarcity with importance. When something appears limited, we instinctively give it more attention. If everyone wants something, we assume it must be valuable. If nobody seems able to get it, we may want it even more. The same principle can appear in relationships. Someone ignores you, and instead of asking, "Why is this person treating me this way?" you may start asking, "What do I need to do to earn their attention?" That is a dangerous shift. Because now the other person's behavior has become a measurement of your worth. You begin trying harder, you become more available, you send another message, you explain yourself more, you try to appear more interesting, more attractive, more successful, more desirable. And underneath all of that effort is one silent desire. Choose me. But why should someone's lack of attention automatically make them more valuable? It shouldn't. Sometimes a person ignores you because they are genuinely busy. Sometimes because they are emotionally unavailable. Sometimes because they are confused. Sometimes because they simply aren't interested. And sometimes, yes, people deliberately withhold attention because they understand that scarcity can increase someone's desire. But regardless of the reason, your responsibility is the same. Don't allow another person's behavior to determine your perception of yourself. Real confidence does not come from being difficult to obtain. It comes from knowing what you bring to the table without needing to convince anyone. There is a profound difference between being mysterious and being emotionally unavailable. There is a difference between having boundaries and playing games. There is a difference between being independent and intentionally ignoring someone to make them chase you. If someone has to manipulate your emotions to maintain your interest, that is not genuine value. And this is where self-respect becomes essential. Instead of thinking, how can I make them value me? Ask a better question. Does the way they treat me reflect the kind of relationship I actually want? That question puts you back in control. You don't need to chase someone simply because they made themselves scarce. You don't need to prove that you're worthy of their attention. And you certainly don't need to compete for a place in someone's life when they have made it clear that they aren't willing to make space for you. Your value does not increase because someone finally notices it. Never confuse someone's absence with your lack of worth. And once you begin to understand that uncertainty can make people chase and that scarcity can create an illusion of value, you arrive at something even more personal, the need for validation. Because sometimes the person you are chasing is not actually the person you want. What you want is what their attention represents. You want to feel chosen. You want to feel important. You want to feel that after ignoring you, they finally looked back and realized what they had lost. And this is where the situation becomes much more powerful psychologically. You are no longer simply pursuing another human being. You are pursuing a verdict about yourself. You are asking them, without saying it directly, am I good enough for you? And when they don't answer, you try harder. You send another message. You become more accommodating. You change the way you speak. You become more available. You start wondering what you could do differently. Perhaps if you were more interesting, more attractive, more successful, more patient, or more mysterious, they would finally give you what you want. But notice what has happened. You have allowed another person's attention to become the scoreboard for your self-worth. That is an extremely dangerous position to live in. Because if they respond warmly, you feel powerful. If they become distant, you feel rejected. If they compliment you, you feel valuable. If they ignore you, you question yourself. Your emotional state is now being controlled by someone else's behavior, and the more desperately you need their validation, the more power you hand them. This is why rejection can sometimes become addictive. Not because the person is necessarily extraordinary, but because your mind becomes determined to reverse the rejection. You don't simply want them anymore. You want to prove that they were wrong not to choose you. You want the victory. You want the moment when they come back. You want them to regret ignoring you. But ask yourself honestly, if that person suddenly gave you everything you wanted tomorrow, would you still want them for who they are? Or would you simply feel relieved because you finally received the validation you were seeking? That question can expose a great deal. Because genuine attraction says, I enjoy who you are. Insecurity says, I need you to want me so I can feel good about myself. Those are not the same thing. And the solution isn't to become cold. It isn't to pretend that you don't care. It isn't to start ignoring people simply because they ignored you. That's just another form of emotional dependence. You are still allowing their behavior to dictate yours. The real transformation happens when you can say, I would love to be appreciated, but I don't need your appreciation to know my value. That is freedom. You can accept rejection without turning it into a personal attack. You can accept someone's lack of interest without launching a campaign to change their mind. You can walk away without needing them to chase you back. And once you stop asking other people to confirm your worth, something inside you becomes quieter. You no longer need to prove yourself. You no longer need to win every person. You no longer need to turn rejection into a challenge. You begin choosing people based not on how badly you want their approval, but on how genuinely they contribute to your life. When you stop needing someone else's validation, their rejection can no longer define you. And when you finally recognize that validation is driving the chase, you begin to see the next truth. Every time you desperately pursue someone's attention, you give away a little more of your emotional power. It usually happens gradually. You send a message and they don't respond. You wait, you check your phone. You tell yourself not to care, but you keep checking anyway. Then you send another message because you don't want to appear as though you're giving up. Maybe you explain yourself. Maybe you apologize, even when you haven't done anything wrong. Maybe you try to make them laugh, impress them, or remind them of the good moments you shared. And with every attempt, you are communicating something without saying it directly. Your attention matters more to me than my own peace. That is where the balance begins to shift. Relationships naturally involve giving and receiving. But when one person constantly pursues while the other constantly withdraws, the relationship becomes emotionally unequal. The pursuer becomes reactive. The distant person becomes the one who determines when communication happens, when affection appears, and when the connection feels alive. And the more you chase, the more accustomed the other person can become to receiving your attention without having to invest much in return. This doesn't mean every person who pulls away is manipulating you. Sometimes people genuinely need space. Sometimes they are dealing with their own problems. Sometimes they simply don't feel the same connection you feel. But whatever the reason, you have to learn to recognize when your effort has stopped being mutual, because there is a moment when persistence stops being admirable and becomes self-abandonment. You cannot convince someone to value you by repeatedly proving your value. You cannot force emotional connection through more messages. You cannot create genuine interest through pressure. And you certainly cannot build a healthy relationship by constantly trying to earn a place that someone is unwilling to give you freely. The instinct to chase often comes from fear. You are afraid that if you stop reaching out, they will disappear forever. But think about that carefully. If the only thing keeping the relationship alive is your constant pursuit, then what exactly are you holding together? Sometimes you don't lose someone when you stop chasing them. Sometimes you finally discover that they were never walking beside you in the first place. This is why emotional discipline is so important. When someone becomes distant, don't immediately react. Pause. Observe. Give the situation enough space for reality to reveal itself. If they care, they will make an effort. If they value the connection, they will contribute. If they want you in their life, you shouldn't have to repeatedly beg for basic attention. And if they don't, their silence is information. You don't have to turn it into an insult. You don't have to become bitter. You don't have to punish them. You simply have to accept what their behavior is telling you. That is strength. Strength is not making someone regret losing you. Strength is not winning the attention of someone who ignored you. Strength is being able to say, I wanted this, but I will not destroy my dignity trying to force it. Once you understand that, you stop chasing people who are running away and start investing your energy in people who are willing to meet you halfway. Never trade your self-respect for someone's attention. And once you stop giving your power away through constant pursuit, something remarkable begins to happen. You discover the difference between caring deeply and becoming emotionally dependent. This is where detachment becomes important. Now, when I say detachment, I don't mean becoming cold. I don't mean pretending that you don't have feelings. I don't mean ignoring someone to make them suffer or disappearing simply to make them chase you. That is not strength. That is another form of dependence because you are still organizing your behavior around their reaction. Real detachment is much quieter. It is the ability to care about someone without allowing their behavior to control your emotional state. You can miss someone and still continue with your life. You can love someone and still accept that they may not choose you. You can hope for a certain outcome while remaining emotionally prepared for the possibility that it will never happen. That is a very difficult form of strength because the human mind wants certainty. When you become attached to a particular outcome, everything begins to revolve around it. You start thinking, they have to come back. They have to understand me. They have to apologize. They have to realize what they lost. And suddenly your peace depends on something completely outside your control. This is the trap. You cannot control another person's feelings. You cannot control whether they respond to your message. You cannot control whether they miss you. You cannot control whether they change their mind. But you can control what you do with your attention. You can decide how many times you will reach out. You can decide what behavior you will accept. You can decide when enough is enough. And when you begin making those decisions from self-respect rather than fear, your entire emotional posture changes. Stop asking, how do I make them stay? You start asking, is this relationship healthy for me? You stop asking, how can I get their attention back? You start asking, why am I giving so much attention to someone who gives me so little? Those questions return your power. Detachment also allows you to see people more clearly. When you desperately want someone, you tend to see their potential instead of their reality. You remember their best moments and ignore the patterns that hurt you. You explain away their inconsistency because you are emotionally invested in the outcome. But distance creates clarity. When you step back, you can finally observe instead of react. You notice whether their actions match their words. You notice whether their interest is consistent. You notice whether you feel peaceful around them or constantly anxious. And sometimes the greatest thing distance can give you is perspective. You realize that the person you were afraid to lose was not necessarily the person who was right for you. Perhaps what you were afraid of losing was the fantasy, the possibility, the validation, the hope that one day they would finally give you everything you had been waiting for. But life becomes lighter when you stop demanding that another person complete the story. Let people choose, let people leave, let people reveal themselves, and then choose accordingly. Because the goal is not to become someone who never cares. The goal is to become someone who can care without losing themselves. Detach from the outcome, and you reclaim your freedom. And when you learn to detach from the outcome, you arrive at the final transformation. You stop asking, how can I make this person choose me? And begin asking, why am I trying so hard to be chosen by someone who isn't choosing me? That is a completely different way of seeing relationships. For a long time, many people measure their worth through the attention they receive. If someone wants them, they feel desirable. If someone pursues them, they feel important. If someone walks away, they immediately begin questioning themselves. But your worth cannot be placed in another person's hands. Think about how much of your energy can disappear when you spend your days trying to become someone's ideal. You change your behavior, you overthink every conversation, you study their reactions, you wonder what you should say next. You become careful not to appear too interested, but terrified of appearing too distant. You are no longer simply being yourself. You are performing for approval. And the tragedy is that even if you succeed, you may not feel free. Because now you have learned that you must constantly maintain their interest. Real confidence begins when you reverse the question. Instead of asking, how do I make them want me? Ask, do I want someone who treats me this way? Instead of asking, how do I get their attention? Ask, is their attention actually worth having? Instead of asking, what can I do to keep them? Ask, what kind of person deserves access to my time, energy, and emotions? These questions force you to move from desperation into judgment. You are no longer standing outside someone's door asking to be invited in. You are standing in your own life deciding who is allowed to enter. That doesn't mean you become arrogant, or it means you develop standards. You begin looking for reciprocity. You notice effort. You notice consistency. You notice whether someone respects your boundaries and whether they make you feel valued without forcing you to compete for their attention. And this is where many people make a mistake. They think becoming powerful means making other people chase them. It doesn't. If your entire strategy is to ignore someone so they will become obsessed with you, you're still trapped in the same game. You are still measuring your success by their reaction. True strength is different. You don't need them to chase you. You don't need them to regret losing you. You don't need them to come back just so you can feel victorious. You simply need to know that you will be okay whether they stay or go. That is freedom. And once you reach that point, your relationships become healthier because you are no longer approaching people from fear. You can appreciate someone's presence without clinging to it. You can walk away from disrespect without creating revenge. You can love deeply without begging. You stop trying to convince people of your value because you understand something important. The right people don't need to be manipulated into recognizing what you bring. They see it through your character, your consistency, your boundaries, and the way you carry yourself. So don't spend your life trying to become irresistible to people who are determined to overlook you. Build yourself, protect your peace, choose people who choose you. And remember, your greatest power is not making someone chase you. It is knowing you never have to chase what truly belongs in your life. Stop chasing approval. Start choosing yourself.